Get started to keep on time. We have a phenomenal session, the last session of our session series with Chianti Classico. Seminar 6, Deconstructing Chianti Classico, the who, what, when, where, and why of assembling the blend. Before I introduce Michaela Morris, I would like to welcome for the last time Ms. Christine Lechner from Chianti Classico. Just say a few words. No, you got to unmute.
I'm going to mute. Thank you very much, Will. And I'm very sad. This is really our last series, our last time to see. And I want really to thank you all very much for participating and who did it for all 6 series, who is today for the first time. And of course, I want to say thank you to our marvelous speakers, to the wonderful Michaela Morris, our ambassador. Thank you very much. And of course, also to John Zabo and to Michael Godel, who did all the other seminars. So we are really very grateful to having you as all our ambassadors for the Canadian market. Thank you also to all of our producers. We had, in all the 6 series, we had about 30 producers coming and showing you their wines. And so we hope that you enjoyed it. And now it's to you, Michaela.
Grazie.
Thank you very much. Grazie a te.
Grazie. We did mention this as the attendees were coming into the Zoom room. Happy International Women's Day today. Just have to make a mention of that. We've got some really solid women on the panel, and of course we've got Christine and the powerhouse of women at the consortium. We're also very happy, of course, to have the gentlemen on board, but must recognize that. So thanks everyone for attending, and hopefully you have lots of questions that we can get to. We've got 6 producers today, and we're going to go through, as Will said, the who, what, when, where, and why. And I think I forgot to add the word how, but I'm sure we're going to get into that as well. For me, when I think about wines, it's always a blend. I mean, you can have different grapes. You can have 100% Sangiovese in the case of Chianti Classico, but certainly there are many different clones of Sangiovese. And then there's also the different parcels that a vineyard might be divided into. And then we've got an example in this seminar with the Brancaia that's coming from 2 different actual areas or communes within Chianti Classico. So seeing how that plays into the wine. But beyond the simple, and it's not simple, the what and the where, there's also the when. And for me, I'm always interested in when are these different lots, let's say, brought together? Are grapes co-fermented? Are they brought in together later? And when is the blend actually made? And when is the wine actually bottled? What decisions go on at each of these different stages? So we have very different realities in terms of wineries that we have today. So their decisions will be different. And I like to get into the why. I think that's the most interesting question when we're talking about something, when we're talking about a blend of any wine, is why these decisions are made. And of course, when we go to visit these wineries, is meeting the people behind them. And today we have a really great lineup of different producers. Victoria Mata from Vicchio Maggio, she was able to get in her dad, John. Lorenzo at Tenute Poggiobanelli was able to get in the winemaker. So there's lots of people to answer our questions today. And I'm going to introduce each of you. So in order of the wines that we're going to be trying, from Castel di Rada, we've got Eleonora Maudi. Do you want to wave to everyone so everyone knows who you are? So you're in charge of hospitality at the property. However, you also have a degree in vinification and viticulture as well from the University of Turin. So lots of insight there. And I'm sure you get your hands dirty during harvest time too, working in the cellar, not just greeting people at the winery. So welcome, Eleonora. From Le Micine, we have Paula Papini-Cook. I always spell your name wrong because I'm thinking Italian, but Paula is Canadian. She's from Quebec, so it is a Canadian-owned property in Chianti Classico. Interesting to hear how you landed in Chianti Classico. And then, so winemaker and owner. And from Val Virginio, we've got Monique Salotto, who is the export manager, and a lovely picture behind you. I almost feel like in Chianti Classico there. From Tenute Poggio Banelli, we've got both Lorenzo Ficini, the export manager, the sales and marketing manager, as well as Leonardo Pini, who's the winemaker. From Brancaia, we have Andrea D'Alessio, who has defected from Piedmont, I believe. You were working at a couple of wineries there and now working in Tuscany with the Brancaia estate. So welcome, welcome, Andrea. And as I mentioned earlier, from Castello Vecchio Maggio, we have Victoria Matta and her father, John. Fantastic. So before we get into the first wine, we're going to have one of Prud'homme's famous polls. All of you have attended these seminars, and it's really great to understand your thoughts around specific wines. So because we're talking about the blend today, one of the things that I wanted to ask the attendees, or all of you, is when you're describing Chianti Classico, if you want to throw up that poll, when you're describing Chianti Classico to your customers, and I'm talking about customers who you can actually talk to about wine, what is it that you typically highlight about that wine? You may talk about many of these or all of these factors, but is there one that is something that is kind of your go-to in describing the style of Chianti Classico? I hope that question made sense. Yeah. Great. Okay, interesting. So no one put other, which means I can't pick on anyone and see what else. I was trying to think of what else you might think of when talking about style, but interesting how low that oak regime is. And I think it's something that we used to talk a lot about, but there's much more interesting things, I think, to get into. I certainly am not surprised to see a fair amount of people talking about the grape varieties, because I do believe indeed this has an impact, but the terroir, and I do think with Chianti Classico, you have such amazing diversity in the territory, which lends itself to a discussion with people about what it is that's going to be in their glass. We'll try to touch a little bit on philosophies behind the wineries as well if we have time, but I really want to focus in on the different aspects of each of the wines. So we're going to start with a trio of Annata, and we'll start specifically with the Castello di Radda. Castello di Radda, as the name suggests, is a property in Radda, and it's owned by the Gusali Beretta family, which, if any of you are familiar with firearms, that's probably the reference that you would have first with this family rather than wine. But in fact, they own at least 3 properties within Italy. So in Franciacorta, in Abruzzo, and then of course this property in Chianti Classico, which is Castello di Radda. And they're located, if you're familiar with Castel di Volpaia, which is an actual hamlet within Radda, they're just below that at about 450 meters above sea level. So the vineyards are really in one, let's say, area. They're not all over the Chianti Classico zone. They're all in Radda. It's about 45 hectares of vineyards. But what's interesting is that these vineyards have been divided into 17 different parcels. So Will, if you want to throw up that picture of the map of Castello di Radda's vineyards, and we'll ask Eleanor to talk about how these different parcels were determined when it came to mapping out the vineyards, and maybe which ones are used specifically for this Chianti Classico.
Yes, of course. So the parcels are determined by natural lay of the land. So each parcel has got a different altitude, exposition, and the plants can have also a different age. About Chianti Classico, we use both the two areas that are Corno on the right and Selvole on the left. So Selvole is colder with an higher humidity, and this fact is due to the proximity of Pesa River, and about Corno is drier. It has got an higher altitude, so it's also drier. And the soil is richer in stones. The resulting final product is a fresher and fruity wine from Selvole, and a wine more structured and full body from Corno area.
So you're looking, so for this particular wine and for this Chianti Classico, you're looking to bring in, the focus is on the freshness, it sounds like. So you're looking for parcels that maybe highlight a bit of the acidity in the fruit, but also bring in a bit of structure from one of the other parcels. Is that right?
Yes, that's
Yeah.
right.
Okay.
We blend together the wine from the different areas in order to have a Chianti Classico that combine the two different characteristics of the two different wines from the land. So about Chianti Classico, we use also Colorino and Canaiolo for 10% that are located in plot number 16, and also a little bit in 11, and in plot number 2 in Selvole area.
Okay, so Will, if you want to put up that picture, the second picture on there, because there's a beautiful picture that Eleonora sent me that shows very well the distinction between the Colorino and I'm assuming it's Sangiovese that's behind it. So this is a picture that was taken later on in the season when the leaves start to turn. So you can see the Colorino, I'm assuming is that very red color, correct? Yeah. Do you want to, can you maybe talk a little bit about what else, what Colorino as well as the Canaiolo brings to the blend? Why do you choose to blend in those grapes in small amounts with the Annata Chianti Classico?
Yes, we have decided to blend with the Colorino and Canaiolo, first of all, because they are traditional varieties of Chianti Classico, and also they give to the wine particular flavors. For example, the Colorino is really floral, and the Canaiolo has got it's really fruity. About the Colorino, also for the color, the name is like that for this fact. So normally it gives a color stronger.
A darker color.
Yes, exactly. So we decide to put together that to blend. In reality, it's 90% Sangiovese, so it's really a little amount. But to enrich the blend, we think that it can be interesting to put that three varieties together.
And do you see these varieties when you move up into the Reserva, the Gran Selezione? Are these grape varieties that you see there, or do you reserve these grapes just for the Annata then?
So just for the Annata, because Riserva Gran Selezione are 100% Sangiovese.
Okay. And why is that? Why would you not put other grapes in your Reserva and your Gran Selezione?
So the grapes for Gran Selezione are from Corno area, plot number 8 that we have seen before. So we obtain a wine that is really more colored, more structured, more full body. So we don't want to blend together with other grapes, because we think that it's okay like that. And we are working in vinification separately in order to have Gran Selezione and Riserva only 100% Sangiovese. So we don't use to put never together with other varieties.
So really the Colorino and the Canaiolo, they're not necessarily grapes that would give structure to a wine that may stand for longer aging. And when do you blend the Colorino and the Canaiolo? Are they co-fermented? Are they co-fermented together with the Sangiovese, or are they kind of brought in close to bottling?
They are fermented separately, and we put together during the blend, normally in January or February, depending on the year.
Okay. So no co-fermentation here.
No.
Okay. So I understand that your resident winemaker is Marco Mascarello, but you also work with Maurizio Castelli, who is a renowned enologist in Tuscany. He actually worked with the consortium in 1973, I believe, early 70s for sure, and then started as an independent consultant in the 80s. So you're one of the wineries that he works with. It's a fairly recent relationship, I believe. Is that correct? That you're working with. So can you maybe talk about how he has impacted, or what he has, how he has influenced the winemaking at the property?
Yes, so Maurizio Castelli has emphasized the traditionality of our wines, using, for example, Agripine Cettage of Sangiovese, and also varieties that are from Chianti Classico. So we produce also something like Merlot Impurity, but his line is to produce wines really traditional.
Okay.
And indeed, for Reserva Gran Selezione, we're using only Sangiovese for this fact. And for Chianti Classico, Colorino and Canaiolo because of that.
Okay, so he's really influenced the this link with the grape varieties, the native grapes of the region, correct? Okay.
Yes.
Fantastic. And I might come back to you and talk a little bit about picking times. But I think we'll move on because it might be a good comparison with one of the other vintages that we're having. So please don't leave us, and we'll talk to you a little bit more in a moment. Does anyone, before we move on, have any specific questions for Eleonora? I don't see anything coming up in the chat box. So you can put them in a little bit later. Eleonora will stay with us, and we'll move on to the Le Micine. And Paula, who the Quebecoise, but you have an Italian background as well. Your mom, I believe, is from Italy. And I understand you went to Italy as a teenager and fell in love. I mean, how could you not at any age fall in love with Italy? And correct me if I'm wrong, but I think you studied agriculture in Montreal. And then you did your master's in vinification in the Loire Valley. And, yes. And as well, an internship in Bordeaux at Chateau Les Trois Croix.
Yes.
Is that right? Yeah. So how did you end up in Chianti Classico then?
So I was born and raised in Montreal, so I'm Quebecoise, and my mom is of Italian origin. My dad is 100% Scottish. I used to visit Italy as a child, and I absolutely loved it. And I remember when I was 15, I told my mom and dad, Mom, Dad, I'm moving to Italy and I'm going to make my life there. And they thought I was quite crazy, but I was so determined that this was what I was going to do. I studied agriculture. And then after agriculture, I was like, I love this. How am I going to put this together with Italy? And of course, wine was the answer. I moved here to study viticulture and enology exactly in the Loire Valley, but I also had some semesters in Italy and in Spain. And then once I specialized, I was like, I want to go back to the land of my grandparents, which is Tuscany. So my grandparents were from the coast of Tuscany. And I've always been a huge fan of the Sangiovese grape. So for me, it was like everything seemed to fit like the pieces of a puzzle.
Great. And you found this property in Gaiole, is where you are, right? So just 7 hectares, so not a huge property, but a beautiful property. Can you talk a little bit about where you are in Gaiole? Because Gaule, like all of the communes, it's a larger area. You have variations, but you have, I think, your own distinct microclimate. Maybe talk a little bit about what it's like at your property.
So I always tend to say this. It's when I love talking about the terroir and about Lemicina, I feel quite unique. High hills that are very south facing, whereas I'm in this kind of bit of a high, but in a valley. So all the hills around me are higher, and so I'm in this little bit of a pocket, which is very particular in that the sun rises a little bit later and sets a little bit earlier, and this makes for its own kind of microclimate. I get a lot of wind from the north coming down through the hills over my vineyards, which is fantastic. It takes away the humidity. But the most distinct thing is the fact that it can be 36 degrees during the day. This is in August. So this huge difference in day and night temperature really affects the ripening of the grapes.
Okay. And when I was visiting the property in a couple of years ago, you had a lovely woman working with you, Sabrina, and she was talking about the macchie di leopardo when it comes to the vineyard. So the leopard spots. So even within this small area of 7 hectares, you have quite different little parcels. How does that affect which grapes go into which wines? Because you do make an Annata, a Reserva, and a Gran Selezione.
Yes. So having 7 hectares is, I think, fantastic because I can walk all my vineyards. And I walk through them basically daily. I prune the vineyards. I work here every day. And so I notice those subtle differences in soil, the vine physiology, how the plants are. And so over the years, being so much in touch with each piece of land, I have found these micro plots within my big plots that I harvest separately. And I usually, my harvesters think I'm nuts because the night before I basically go with string and delimit the pieces of vineyard that I want to pick separately. And I keep every single selection separate. I have lots of tanks. So I have lots of medium tanks, big tanks, small tanks. So I keep every single thing separate. And it's wonderful because I have so much to work with. And then
we're losing you a little
by
bit.
doing this, I have right. So I managed to isolate.
So we're losing you from time to time, Paula. Your connection
Okay.
is coming in and out. So you've all these different tanks. Question for you. You say you go into your vineyard and you delimit it with string. So does this change from vintage to vintage? So because some people map out their vineyards and it's, this is the parcel each year. So you're looking at it each vintage, you're taking a look at your vineyard. Is that right?
Yes. So I paused my video just in case that it can help maybe get my voice coming through better. So yes, it is different every vintage because the area that might be best one year might not be the same another year. Usually they are pretty much the same, even the small micro parcels that I've delimited, usually they're mostly the same, but some years it can be different, specifically in years of heavy drought. So usually the areas that are my best grapes are the ones that have a little bit more water stress, but in particularly dry years, too much water stress cannot be that great. Yeah.
So that those grapes might go into the Annata, or is it going into a different wine then?
Exactly. So that's basically what I do is usually I'm defining when I'm picking where the grapes are going to go. And so when I have those best grapes, I'm already picking them for one single area for my Gran Selezione, which year in, year out is a southwest facing plot, which is always perfect for the Gran Selezione. The Reserva tends to be the higher hills. And then whatever is left is used for the Chianti Classico.
Okay. Will, do you mind putting up the picture from the property? You might be able to see in this picture what Paula was describing, the fact that she's in an area that's sort of a valley, whereas she's already high up, but there's vineyards higher than hers. This is taken in March, so you're not seeing a lot of leaves on the vine. It's not the best beauty shot of Chianti Classico, but what I really like about this picture is if you look closely at those vines, there's a very specific training that the vines are grown in, and that is candelabro. Maybe you can explain what candelabro is, Paula, and how that is helpful, especially to Sangiovese.
So the candelabro is very particular. There aren't a lot of vineyards that use this training style. I love it because I feel like in the Sangiovese, which tends to be a very vigorous grape, this kind of contains the vigor. So it kind of calms that vigor rather than the Cordone. And also there's a better distribution of the sap across the branches. And so I find there's more uniform grape ripening across the candelabro.
And so there's the 3 branches, essentially, 3 permanent branches, yeah?
Yes. 3 main branches, yeah, exactly. So it looks kind of like a chandelier, right? Yeah. So you would have the central one and then 2 branches on the side, and it's with spurs.
Right. And I just have one final question for now. And quickly, if you just want to, you have some Malvasia Nera in this wine. Eleonora was already talking about Canaiolo and Colorino, but here we have some Malvasia Nera. What are the characteristics of Malvasia Nera? What does that bring to the blend?
So the Malvasia Nera is actually quite, I would say, an aromatic grape in terms of a red. But without being overpowering, I find it has a lot of nice floral notes to it. And then the other thing is, which is almost what influences more its effect on the wine, is that its acidity is lower and it has a higher pH.
Mm.
So I love using it in the annata because it basically can kind of smoothen out and calm down that nervous acidity of the Sangiovese, which is very present in its youth. So when I have to do the annata, I like to blend in that Malvasia Nera because it makes it almost more easy to drink and more ready to drink, the annata.
Okay, interesting. I hadn't actually heard that explanation for Malvasia Nera before. So, everyone has their own impressions or observations. So thank you so much. So stick with us, and we'll try the last of our annata, and with the Val Virginio, and bring in Monique here to help us with this. So this is the Nero dei Venti. So the last 2 wines, both 2018. Here we have a 2015, so a wine with a little bit of bottle age. This is actually a wine that's made by a cooperative, which is the Cantina Sociale Colli Fiorentini. So they're located in just south of Florence, that area, covering not just Chianti Classico, but the broader area of the Chianti zone. And it was established in 1972. There are 350 families who bring in their grapes to the cooperative, and they cover about 1,500 hectares, so large. In fact, I believe they're the largest Chianti producer. We talk about we talk about the world of Chianti. However, specifically with Chianti Classico, I'm wondering how many hectares do your families cover in Chianti Classico in the area of San Casciano Val di Pesa and Greve, so the sort of the northern part of Chianti Classico. How many hectares and how many families do you have who are specifically producing grapes for Chianti Classico?
Okay.
Over to you, Monique.
Okay, thank you. So we have only 12 families which produce the Chianti Classico, and they are from San Casciano and Tavernelli.
Okay. No, sir, go ahead.
Okay. So the COP began with only 7 farmers, at the beginning. Now we are 350, so I have 350 bosses. It's not easy. But they start with only 7. And they start because they didn't speak English. It was difficult because they didn't have a good, a nice property to receive, to be welcoming people. But he were a huge history of producers. Okay, so 2 generations as the others. And they start together to buy a new container, a modern container, and they thought, so let's start together. And we took a loan, and all the families thought, oh, you are crazy, you are crazy. But now we are 350, so they're not too much praise. Now we already spent 12 millions in investing in technology. So it was not able, just talking about why we are called, okay? It was not able just for one of them became spending 12 million in efficiency and productivity and this kind of technology, huge lab. So that's why we are together.
Yeah, I think the
Simply,
cooperative is a very it's an important model, like you say, to group together these growers who have a tradition and may not necessarily be bottling their own wines. But as you said, you had 350 bosses, 12 of them in Chianti Classico.
12 of them.
Yes, 12 in Chianti Classico. So I'm wondering how you manage with your 12 bosses in Chianti Classico specifically. The parameters, how do you work with them in terms of viticulture? Do you have specific parameters that each of them, or standards that they have to attain in order to have the wines actually go into, sorry, the grapes go into the wine, and what those are?
Yes, yes. So we have the 2 enologies, one, the intern enology, and the other one is called Fabio Signorini, who has the experience abroad in South Africa and Bordeaux. He worked with us from 1982, and he knows everyone. And we are very lucky because he's a little famous here between us, here at the Chianti area, but he's also one of our co-ops. He's part of the council. So he's our enologist and he knows everyone. And he went to the properties month by month, and he checks and he controls the production. And almost 2 weeks before the picking time, the vendemmia, he made like a schedule, and we have a huge meeting. We lunch together, all those farmers. We have a lunch together, and he explained how it's gonna be the harvest, and each time, each week, and even each hour, during the day, like in the morning or in the afternoon. So he divided, and I asked him, but how do you know, how do you make your choice even inside the Chianti Classico property? Do you make with the lab, because we have a lab? And he, Monique, I have the experience. Okay, in the beginning I made all the analysis, but now today, if I take a grape and I taste, I already know. So I split them. I choose. I make my choices because I taste them. If I have any concern, okay, I send to analysis. But now I already know them for 10 years before, 10 years before.
So that's amazing. So he knows all of the growers so well, and he's spending a lot of time in the vineyard with them. It actually sounds quite convivial. Everyone getting together for lunch right before harvest. Did that happen in 2020? Were you allowed to get together?
No, 22, no.
Yeah.
We made a meeting online. It was very hard because they are very ancient people. So you cannot imagine the crazy thing to put them online.
Yes, yeah, that's too bad. So then then harvest happens, and everyone has their schedule then to bring in their grapes. And Will, if you want to put up that picture, there's a beautiful picture that Monique sent me with the president of the cooperative. I'm not sure what his name is. You can tell us what that is. And when you saw him bringing in his grapes, so this is what happens. The president, he's one of the farmers as well, picks his grapes and lines up, waits his turn to have those grapes analyzed, I'm assuming. And you ran out there and you wrote a quote from Eleanor Roosevelt: "The future belongs to those who believe in the beauty of their dreams." Can you explain why when you saw the president with his grapes, what made you think of that?
Because when we have this lunch time, it's twice a year, they start talking about how it was founded, the co-op, and what happens during the year. And the first time when I first came to the co-op, I already were a client, their customer. And when I became an employee, I was very proud. And I saw that they didn't have any point and an influencer that used to talk about them, oh my, why? And then I started doing this job and start coming some recognizing, I don't know how can I say, but they start to recognize the wine, the media. Okay. And the first time that I showed them, it was a huge meeting. The first time that I showed them, they got 9 points. It was the first time, and we got 9 points in the first time. And I showed that they were like crazy. And I started crying because each one has their history, and they look up there and they saw, they work a lot to have these dreamings, but they must dream together. It's a little bit more hard. We know because we are human. So dream together, it's a little bit hard. And you suffer a little bit more, maybe. And looking at the 9 points, it was the first point, they look like crazy guys. And that's why I made this one when I saw my president there, because sometimes we show him some news, like the solar panels. We have the wines with 100% made, vinified with solar panels, with green energy. But think that convince him, but no, he's the first one to dream. That's why I look him and I'm gonna put this in.
Great, lovely. It's a beautiful story, and I think the idea is how it's not just one person growing these grapes, but you have a community of people growing these grapes, and you need to have the quality from each of these single growers in order to produce a wine that is of a certain quality. So thank you so much, and again we'll come back to you as the seminar goes on. I think it's time for a second poll question. Will, if you want to put that on. And we're moving into the Riserva and the Gran Selezione. So the idea behind this question is, when you're looking at the difference between an Annata and then going into these higher levels of the Riserva and the Gran Selezione, is there a perception or impression that you have in terms of what grapes are going into it? It's not just about grapes when we talk about blending Chianti Classico, but it is one of the things. And I just am curious, or we're curious to see if you have an impression that there's either more of an importance placed on international varieties at these Riserva Gran Selezione levels, or in indigenous, higher percent of Sangiovese, or in fact, you don't even have, you haven't actually noticed a difference. So, Will, you've got a smile on your face. You're gonna share the results with us? Okay, yeah, so, I think that this trend towards more Sangiovese, especially at the Gran Selezione, but we're also seeing it at the Reserva level too. A few of you put international grapes, and I do think that that's something that we still see, and really interesting with the 3 wines that we have here, because we're going to be talking a little bit about it. And some of you aren't noticing a big difference between what grapes are going into the Annata versus the Reserva and the Gran Selezione. It really is an estate choice in terms of how they manage the different grape varieties. Eleonora talked a little bit about using these indigenous grape varieties only at the Annata level and having 100% Sangiovese. But we'll take a look at the wines that we have in front of us that are Reserva and Gran Selezione. And I think the 2 Reserva make for an interesting comparison. Because first of all, they're from different areas. The first one, the Poggio Bonelli, is coming from Castelnuovo Beredenga, whereas the Brancaia is a blend from vineyards in Radda and Castellina in Chianti. So they're different areas. You also have different vintages, 2 very different vintages, the 2017 versus 2016, and then different philosophies in terms of the blend. So in the first one, the Poggio Bonelli, the Reserva is 100% Sangiovese, and it's Merlot that goes into the Annata. And it's the opposite in the Brancaia, where the Brancaia Reserva has 20% Merlot, and in their Annata is where you see 100% Sangiovese. So interesting to hear what the 2 different philosophies are there. Last but not least, though, these 2 wines, these 2 wineries, they both work with the same consulting enologist. That's Carlo Farini, another renowned enologist in the area. And I think we have 2 very, very different wines. So I will start with the Tenute Poggio Bonelli, which I mentioned is in Castelnuovo Beredenga. And Will, you can go right ahead and put up that first picture, which shows the property. Well, it shows the property's vineyards. They're in the southern part of Castelnuovo Beredenga. And here I find there's an expansiveness. It's the south of Chianti Classico, and there's an expansiveness to the hills. And you also get a lot of quite large or larger properties, a lot of properties that own a lot of land. So Poggio Bonelli is a winery that goes back to the Middle Ages, and it was owned by a number of noble families over the years. So the Piccolomini family, the Landucci family. It has been owned by the Banca Monte Paschi di Siena, I think since the 60s. I'm not quite sure about the date on that. You can correct me on that, but this is the oldest bank in Italy. And when we talk about a bank owning a winery, sometimes it's hard to understand who is behind it. I think about, what if the Royal Bank owned a winery in Niagara or the Okanagan, and it just seems strange. But I've met Lorenzo Ficini, who is joining us today, who's the sales and marketing manager. And when I met him, I just felt like he owned the property, just the way he spoke about it and everything he knew about it. And it's great because we're also meeting the winemaker today, which is Leonardo Pini. So now you have, the property is 800 hectares, but only 88 hectares of vines. And once again, this is a property that straddles Chianti Classico and Chianti. So in Chianti Classico, there's about 18 hectares, I believe. But these again are broken into 12 different plots. Can you talk about, again, how these different plots have been determined and how you manage those in terms of making your Chianti Classico, your Annata, versus this Reserva in particular?
Yeah, thanks, Michaela. Today I managed to have Leonardo with me, and I will have Leonardo maybe talking a little bit about the wine. You're right. Our estate is in a very different part of Chianti Classico. It's very wide open. It's very gentle hillside. We are in the Senese hillside, so we are our vineyards that are located not just in the Classico area, even outside, because we lay almost on the borderline of the appellation, stays from 300, 280 up to 370 meters. So the altitude here in this area, it's almost this altitude. This part of Tuscany is alluvial origin. It dates back to the Pliocene age. So I would say that one of the characteristics of our viticulture is definitely influenced by the soil. Climate is pretty continental here because we are pretty open. We have low temperatures in winter and sometimes dry summers, like it happened in 2017, and today we present Chianti Classico Riserva 2017. Temperature changes are, I would say, pretty high. Can be very important. We have 700, 800 millimeters of water per season average. I would say that all the 12 plots that we have identified in the Chianti Classico almost are affected the same way, of course, by the climate, but they have completely different soil components. The soils, as I said, are alluvial, relatively young, about 10 up to 20 million years old. So we are talking about the Pliocene age. And we have two types of soil. We have sedimentary origin, and we have, as I said, alluvial origin. Most of the soil are alluvial origin, and these are mainly sand and clay dissolved with pebbles, so with a little bit of calcareous rock, and what really makes the complexity of our Chianti Classico together with the Merlot, and I would get what Paola from Micine said before. We like to have ready to approach, ready to drink Chianti Classico blended with the Merlot in order to smooth out the high acidity of the Sangiovese, and then focusing with 100% Sangiovese on the Riserva. We don't do the Gran Selezione.
So the Merlot, you feel smooths the Sangiovese. This is why you want it in the Annata, and then for this Riserva, 100% Sangiovese. You just going back to those specific plots. For the Riserva, is that coming from specific plots? Are there vines that are older perhaps, or is it a different elevation? And Will, I think there's a picture of one of the Riserva plots there that you see so maybe you can talk about what is it specific for this Riserva then that you look for?
This is just one part of the plot of the Riserva that is 2.5 hectares, right? Around 2.5 hectares. What really makes the difference is definitely the soil, the balance of all the components of the soil. So sand, clay, and the skeleton. What we call skeleton.
The rocks.
Yes, the calcareous rocks that are very mixed in this parcel. They really have we really find a good balance of components here, and plus the exposure. I would say the exposure is from southeast to southwest. It's a great exposure. Really sunlight all day long.
You have several kind of exposition that let us to manage also the characteristic of each vintage, of course, because we are able to match the situation, to manage the several kind of harvest that we have with rain, dry and the hot harvest year after year, and we have several possibilities to manage the origin of our Sangiovese for the reserve instead of the Annata.
Yeah.
The Annata one.
Yeah. And Michela, just to get into the Riserva plot, the Riserva is definitely it tend to be very to deliver powerful wine, generally speaking, because it's very south exposed. So again, it's the sunlight. It's very intense in this plot. Okay. So we have to manage. We have to manage the vintages. And in 2017, we had to manage the leaf.
Yes,
the leaf on the plant.
Of course, when the harvest in the beginning of the summer let us to show us the characteristics of the hot harvest, so dryness, lot of sun. We try to manage the situation, let the plant maintaining more leaves that are able to cover the grapes from the direct sun and help the plants to follow the process of maturation with the photosynthesis and the normal gas exchanging of the plants. Of course, is very important. While in general, when the situation of the rain is normal, close to the harvest, very often we decide to cut a lot of leaves, the leaves that cover the grapes, to let the sun, of course, be able to improve the maturation and make the grapes dry after, for example, after the rain.
Okay, so for 2017, then it was dry for a very long time, but then you had some rains at the beginning of September. So when did you pick the grapes for the Riserva? Did you pick them after the rains, after the vineyards had been refreshed, or did you have to pick them beforehand?
We started the harvest in the end of August, but for the parcel for the Riserva, we arrived to harvest in the 10-12 of September around.
Yeah, that usually is a parcel that we pick at the end of September.
Yes.
So it was much earlier. Yeah.
And one last thing is, no matter what we could manage at the vineyard level, we couldn't be below the 14.5 alcohol on this vintage, and that is definitely the sun of what happened in the season. So very hot and dry, and very intense, very robust wine with a lot of fruit.
Yes, you feel the 2017 here. We're going to we'll come back to you because we do have a question that you might want to talk about, but I do want to give time to Brancaia and Castello Vecchiomaggio. So if we can have Andrea join us from Brancaia. So Brancaia is a fairly recent property by comparison, established in 1981 by the Swiss couple Bridget and Bruno Widmer. The estate is actually celebrating its 40th anniversary this year. And as I mentioned earlier, you have the two properties, so vineyards in Castellina and vineyards in Radda as well. If you want to pop up that picture, Will, there's a picture that I put of the Radda vineyards, because this is where the actual winery is. But really interesting, when I visited the property, I drove from Castellina to Radda, and two things I noticed. One, it was the one and only time that I've been accosted by a family of Cingale, not just one, but a mom and three little babies, just speaking to the remoteness maybe of Radda. But the other thing is that it was raining in Castellina, that day, just happened to be that day. And when I got to Rada, even though the sky is looking quite gray here, there was no rain. So very different areas. So first, I would like Andrea maybe to talk about the two different areas that you have at Brancaia. What are the differences between them?
Yeah, we have these two estates and they are quite different, but mostly because of the altitude. So actually in our estates we have Castellina, which is lower than Radda. So in Radda we have a higher altitude. So basically it's much more windy and so we have a much more quick maturation than what we have in Castellina. So basically for us, normally also in the composition of the soil. So normally in Castellina we have clay and equal sand, silt, and while for example in Radda we have much more, it's a small part of clay, we have stony skeleton and it drains quickly. So, and so we have these very two different kind of terroir, and of course for us the Sangiovese is always better in terms of maturation and complexity in our estate in Castellina, while basically in the Merlot we have the estate in Radda, which is much more, which give much more complexity, and normally all the vintages can have the same high quality, while Castellina is really very good for our Sangiovese.
Okay, and so why then the Merlot in the Reserva and not in the Annata?
So actually, with the Annata for us is much more recent than the Reserva. So the Reserva is it's our historic wine. Before was just called Chianti Classico, then became Reserva, but it was always at the same style of blend and aging. The Chianti Classico is born a bit recently, so with 2013 vintage, and the idea was to create something completely different than our Reserva, and especially to give the characteristic of 100% Sangiovese in purity. So to give basically an idea of the characteristic of the grapes, so not just of the terroir but of the grapes. So when you would like to taste a Sangiovese, you would like to have something simple. So our Chianti Classico is 100% Sangiovese aged. We have only 2/3 in stainless steel and 1/3 in concrete. So basically there's no oak for our Chianti Classico, only for 12 months. So it's very fresh, very fruity, very elegant, very pleasant. While our Reserva is not just a Chianti Classico aged 1 year more, but is a completely different wine with this blend of 20% Merlot. So it's 80% Sangiovese aged for 16 months in tonneau. We use the tonneau to maintain the typicity of the Sangiovese, so to don't have too much influence from the small oak. While the Merlot is aged for 16 months in barrique, and then we blend the wine. So all our blends are just made at the end. So we don't use to age the wine blended, and we used to keep separate all our parcels and all our grapes. And then the blend is done later by our team. So there is Fabrizio Amar and Carlo Ferrini, but of course the one taking the last decision is always Barbara, which is owner and winemaker as well.
And there's actually a question about that, and it's something that I wanted to ask as well. So you have the Barbara, like you say, is in charge. She has 22 harvests under her belt, and she's at the property all the time. She's the daughter of Bridget and Bruno. But when the four of them get together, then how is the blend decided? Is it a blind tasting? Does everyone do their own blend, and then the four of them taste it? Can you talk about the process just quickly?
The process is that everything is kept separate and is going into the oak, and then of course the part which is already set to be a Chianti Classico is going in another way because it's not going in oak. While for the other parts, especially for the Sangiovese and for the Merlot, the idea is that what is not moving into the Chianti Classico Riserva and into the blue is going into the Tre. So basically they have all the parcels separate and I think every time they met together and they try from the barrel and then they selected the one that is, so probably, of course they know before, of course the harvest is done by us. So, but you know in advance what is the best part, but they are doing this tasting personally by the barrels and by the barrique, and they are choosing the one that are going through the blue and through the Chianti Classico Riserva, and of course the rest which is going into the Tre. So there is a very strict selection. So actually this is something that is not priorly decided, so we don't have any specific vineyard which is dedicated to a singular wine. So it's completely different than in other regions where you have the single vineyard of the single grape, but also in the Chianti Classico region somewhere is like this. But from us, all the vineyards are managed to produce the best quality possible. Then of course, all the harvests are different, and so it will be a dream to produce all the top quality every year, but unfortunately we have to take also in consideration the weather combinations, and of course you have to make this selection. And you know, for example, in 2017 vintage, maybe the one that is your vineyard, which is in a more unlucky place that normally is maybe in the down part of the hill with much more water in the soil that normally you don't use for your best cru because you need a southwest with good exposure or something. Maybe in that vintage, this vineyard is the best you have because of course the other have suffering a bit more so for the hot temperature. So.
Yeah, so it is very, very vintage dependent as well. One very quick question before we move on to the last wine. So you're blending from these different vineyards. You don't make a Gran Selezione, but there is this movement to make a Gran Selezione and also to highlight the specific commune. Is there any plans at Brancaia to make separate bottlings from Radda and Castellina?
First of all, our Chianti Classico Riserva legally could be a Gran Selezione, so it respects all the legal parameter, but we started with the label Riserva and we think it's not good to move just to change label or appellation or something. We are doing now, we are working on a 100% on 100% Sangiovese that I'm not sure yet if will be a Gran Selezione, but probably it will be. And it will be just 100% from Castellina. So we would like to give, especially because in Castellina, honestly speaking, as I said before, in our estate, the Sangiovese is much better in Castellina than in Radda. So there will be an addition with Vintage 2019 of a small parcel of Chianti Classico, 100% from Castellina, and probably will be a Gran Selezione. Yeah.
Great. Well, we look forward to that.
This is just an exclusive information.
Okay.
So.
You got it here first. That's great. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you.
So there are a couple of questions I want to address, but let's first taste this, talk about the Castello Vicchiomaggio. Which, as the name suggests, Castello, there's a castle that dates back to 957 AD. So it's a very, very old castle. And as I'm to understand, it's the largest castle south of Florence as well. So very, very large castle. Now it was purchased by the Matta family, and the property was purchased by the Matta family in 1966 by John's father, Federico, who was originally from Piedmont. But ended up living in London and had a successful import company there. And the purchase of Castello Vicchiomaggio was a retirement property. John, you went and studied winemaking in Alba, I believe, and started making wine there, and have been making wine for many years there, and now work with your with your children. I've had the pleasure of meeting Sebastiano. This is my first time meeting Victoria. Maybe you can talk a little bit about the division of labor with the family. Just quickly talk about who does what at the estate nowadays.
Sure. Well, good evening to everybody. I'm division of labor. I'm basically everyone does everything and I supervise. So that's the first step. But Victoria, we're going to split this. So I'll talk technical and I'll let Victoria just say a few words on herself, her two sisters, her mother and brother who do all the heavy lifting.
Yes, no, at Castello Vecchio Maggio, as you said, Michela, thank you. Is a family-run winery. So my grandfather Federico purchased the castle in 1964, and my father John started his career here at Vecchio Maggio in 1970. When he started, I think that of course he knows better than me. In 1970, the vineyards, all the vineyards, the Chianti Classico region also. Was focused with a different philosophy because was like focus on high quantities wine, and so my father started a highly innovative program of replanting that at that time was highly innovative to in line with our philosophy of producing an high quality wine. So we are now all involved in the business because at Vecchio Maggio we have different businesses. We have the wine that is the main activity, and then we have also an agriturismo, a restaurant. We are also a wedding venue, so we are all able to work all together as a family in good work because we have different businesses. Otherwise, I think it's quite hard to work all together.
Yeah. So we're trying the La Prima, the Gran Selezione.
Yes,
and you make about 8 different wines, but today we're trying one of your Gran Selezione. You have 2. Will, if you want to throw up the picture of the La Prima vineyard, we'd love to hear about what it is that is specifically special about the La Prima vineyard that made you select this for your Gran Selezione.
Sure. La Prima vineyard in Vecchio Maggio, the whole estate is 150 hectares, but vineyards, we've got 24 hectares of Chianti Classico and 11 hectares for Toscana EGT, which, by the way, are not here. They're owned by us, but they're at Grosseto. They're by the beach. They're just 3 kilometers by the beach. So our IGT wines are mainly produced from our Grosseto vineyards, whereas Chianti Classico, all our 24 hectares are here at Greve in Chianti. La Prima vineyard, as you can see here, has excellent exposition. It's south. The view here is actually south, just a degree to the east. So it's south with a few degrees to the east, but the whole vineyard is south facing and open to the east and open to the west. So it's on a hill. We're on the crest of a hill here. The altitude is 270 meters. And the top of the vineyards that you can see to your right, where the vineyards end and the olive groves begin, they're at 280 meters. And being on the crest of a hill, there's always a breeze. So we chose this for the exposition. All our vineyards are south-facing, but this is a little bit more south-facing than everything else, let's say. So this was chosen for the Gran Selezione. Our soil at Vecchio Maggio is all fairly similar. Clay predominates. Our vineyard areas go from about 25% of clay to 33, 34% of clay. So that gives for a very heavy soil. that does need to be dug over quite a few times during the growing season. And what makes the difference? So apart, when we answered your question, we said soil exposition, but the main difference that I've seen, I've been doing this game for 50 years now. So I'm actually, for everyone that's British or British English, I'm an OAP. I don't know if that expression exists in Canada, but I'm officially an OAP, old age pensioner. That's what I am. So I went to school at Alba in 1966. So, and incidentally, my daughter Victoria is now studying enology at the University of Florence. So she's doing this during her spare time in between working at Vicchiomaggio, cooking for her husband and looking after her one-year-old son.
So is she helping you blend the wines then? So when you decide to the final blends, do you work with your dad, Victoria?
No, it's business.
Well, Victoria tastes with me.
Yes, I
certainly.
taste as well.
We do
Yeah,
the tasting
sure.
together. But in the last harvest, Victoria, the last few months, couldn't taste because she was expecting the baby. And then there were all the questions, not drinking, breastfeeding a baby and so on. But what makes the big difference, and hasn't been mentioned, is the yields per hectare. Because Sangiovese, you can get huge differences between different yields per hectare. The maximum by law is 52 hectoliters per hectare, which is very low. If you think our maximum yields are lower than Barolo or Barbaresco, they're lower than Nuits Saint-Georges and the Côte de Nuits. So they're really low, but for an intense Sangiovese, and I'm referring to our Gran Selezione, here we're down to about 32, maximum 35 hectoliters per hectare. And this makes a difference.
So it's not just the grape. I mean, there is some Merlot in here, but it's not just the grape. It's not just the selection of the oak. It's you're also basing it on yield. So this particular site, typically you're getting lower yields. You're pruning it in order to
heavy pruning. It's a single cane Gouillot, but we only leave 3 or 4 buds, so that keeps the production down. But even for our Annata, which is again a single plot Sangiovese, and that's just Sangiovese, our Annata is never more than 47, 48 hectoliters per hectare. But that's what makes the difference. And in here, we also have a small percentage of Merlot. Small means from 5 to 8 or 9%. That will vary from the vintage. We use Merlot in this Gran Selezione because we find Merlot gives elegance. And our Gran Selezione, we want this to be an eminently elegant wine. It has a lot of bottle age. The 2016 that everybody has has exactly 2 years bottle age. It was bottled in January 2019. And we try to give our Gran Selezione, a year in bottle is the absolute minimum. But we're working up to giving it 18 months or 24 months in bottle before release. Obviously, this is 2 years bottle age. When it was released, it had a year and a half bottle age. But this was all bottled in one batch in January 2019. And I think that's coming out on the bouquet.
There's still but there's still a nice freshness of fruit to it as
yes,
well. Very distinct aromas. Thank you so much. Everyone hold tight. We're kind of at the time, and I know with 6 producers, everyone has a lot to say, but I do have a couple of questions. If you want to stick around, if you need to leave, I totally understand. Maybe we can just address a couple of quick questions. Is everyone good with that? Yeah. So one of them in particular, we talked about grape varieties. And like I said, it's not the only thing when it comes to Chianti Classico. But Sebastian actually sent in a question, and it is a question that came up in a previous seminar that I was doing. And it is about the about white grape varieties. So for many years, Chianti Classico battled against having white grape varieties in the blend, and the idea was for quality. However, nowadays with climate change and warmer vintages, there is an idea, and maybe it's the Canadian perception, because I've had this question as well, Sebastian, is there a regret to have banned white grape varieties when they could possibly add freshness and acidity to the wine? And if you're not in agreement with these white grapes, fine, but maybe you can tell us about how you deal with that in warmer vintages. So I'll ask a couple of you, and if you can keep your answers concise, so we can maybe get a couple of answers from everyone. Maybe I'll circle back to Leonardo and Lorenzo at Tenute Poggiobanelli, and your thoughts on white grape varieties in Chianti Classico. Did you want to unmute? Is there a regret? Is there a movement or people who want it, who want those white grape varieties back? And if not, how are you keeping that freshness that the white grapes might bring?
I would say that that's a very interesting question, because we were talking with Leonardo while the other producer were presenting the wine and tasting the wine. The wine is still show a very high freshness. We have bottled the wine more than a year ago, like a year and a half ago. So it was the mid 2019. We bottled the Riserva, and it's very interesting the fact that the soil really makes the difference here. I think the sandy, la sabbia, no? I think the sandy part is really what really keep the freshness in the Sangiovese very important, because the plot of the Riserva it's quanto sarà di argilla? How much would be clay?
Around 20%.
20% clay, and then sand and pebbles. Really, this balance helps the Sangiovese to keep the pH low, and in fact the soil also retain the heat, and this is very important for maintaining the powerness of the Sangiovese without losing the powerness and keeping it high.
So the question though so there's no consideration, there's no thought, there's no regret about having given up white grape varieties in Chianti Classico? No. Okay. So Paula, do you have any?
I thought you were talking about how we keep the acidity.
Yes, there's that aspect as well. But the question was about, because we were talking about grapes, and is there a regret to white grape? But I think it's interesting what you say about why you think there's still freshness in the wine due to the soil. So perhaps there is no need for those white grapes. But it'd be nice to get the perspective of a couple of other producers. Paula, newer to the area, you weren't there in the era of white grape varieties, but do you talk about that with your colleagues?
So for me, the way I think about it is 300 years ago, when the blend of Chianti was made, the Sangiovese probably didn't ripen as fast or as well as it does today. Mm-hmm. And those white grape varieties, they ripened earlier. So they actually, in the past, provided some smoothness, and they didn't provide actually freshness. They were more ripe than the Sangiovese, right, and they made the wine more drinkable. This is my, kind of thought process, okay? So I see Monique agreeing with me, so that's kind of cool. So in the past, those white grape varieties ripened earlier, Trebbiano, Malvasia Bianca, and they were actually helping the Sangiovese be more drinkable in the past. With the climate change getting so hot over these last 300 years, let's say, the Sangiovese has actually become more easy ripening. and not needing those whites to smoothen them out. Whereas nowadays, now we're thinking, oh my God, now it's too hot and we have to get that freshness back. So I think that in the past it was a great concept blending these white grapes in, but maybe because the climate's already too hot, what grape, maybe the Malvasia Bianca and the Trebbiano wouldn't be ideal white grapes to use nowadays in this area. We'd need other grape varieties that are ripening later. I don't know, my Vermentino, for example, that I have planted north facing, ripens in October. So that's particular, but I'm in a cooler area than other people, I think.
No, I appreciate that perspective. That's really interesting what you say. We weren't around 300 years ago. We don't know. But John Matta, you, when you started making wines, at that point, you still had to include white grapes in the blend. So what are your thoughts on
well, I was around 200 years ago, yes. So I feel like I was around 200 years ago. No, we did use white grapes. We didn't like using white grapes because you can't make a full-bodied red with white grapes. So it's as simple as that. When we're talking of wines that we made in the 70s or late 60s, and they were fresh, fruity, easy to drink, what today the terminology is quaffing wines. So we don't make quaffing wines anymore. So we can't use white grapes. I mean, they're not using white grapes in Barolo or Barbaresco or Bordeaux or wherever. And for me, it's the producers lobbied to have white grapes removed. So as you say in American English, I don't know if it's in Canadian English, but period. That's it. White grapes.
And I'm sure that it's funny that this question has come up in my last seminar and this seminar, and I've had discussions recently with people as well. I mean, Sangiovese is a great grape in terms of the freshness, and I think it's pH as well. You also have this beautiful diversity of terroir, different altitudes as well. Eleonora, I think at Castel di Rada with Maurizio Castelli, one of the techniques that he uses to maintain freshness is to pick some of the grapes quite early. With the Sangiovese. So I'm not sure if he was around in 2017, but he was talking about this to me for 2017, picking grapes earlier. And then the blending in that 10% of those with the grapes that are picked later in order to keep the freshness.
Yes, exactly. It's a strategy in order to have a fresher wine. Indeed, in 17 that was really warm, we used this strategy. About 2018, it was quite regular. So we have started at the end of September. And we finished in mid-October, so there wasn't this problem, but in some warm year, yes.
Yeah, fantastic. So unless there's another burning question, there was an interesting question from Rod. I hope that it got answered throughout this thread because there's lots of chat there at the end. If you have a burning question, raise your hand and ask it now. But I think that we've gone about 10 minutes over, and I just want to be respectful of everyone's time. Thank you so much to all of the producers for sharing your insight, for sharing your wines. Thank you so much to Christine and everyone at the consortium for not just this seminar, but for the great series. We've had so much Chianti Classico, and we need more. And this has been beautiful to bring in a little bit of a virtual travel to an area that I think everyone here loves. And of course, thank you so much to the team at Prud'Homme, because technology is not my area of expertise, and you do such a great job at running these seminars. So thank you so much.
It's a pleasure to host you, Michaela. Thank you so much for taking the time to organize everything and make this so approachable. And Christine, we've spoken every day for the last 4 weeks. It's very sad to have to end this, but hopefully we'll be seeing you and more Chianti Classico here in Canada soon.
Grazie.
Thank you. Yeah, thank you, Michela, for sharing all your knowledge on Chianti Classico, and we hope to see you very back soon in Chianti Classico to taste more wines, and so cross fingers that you can come back. And of course, thank you very much to Will and his team, Amanda and Mike, for putting this together. And we hope to come back to Canada soon, or at least bringing you Chianti Classico back on the screens and on Zoom. So thank you very much to everybody.